go.
God bless you all. This is Joshua again. I want to do another segment, a part 2 of what I was talking about last time. But also, I want to do something on marriage this time. I want to do something on marriage. A lot of people don't understand the seriousness of marriage. God spoke to me. He says, Joshua, he says, the way you know a true marriage is that I honor it with my presence and miracles. He says, I honor marriage with my presence and miracles. You have to understand that the first miracle took place at a wedding. God says, I love marriage so much that I allowed the very first miracle take place at a wedding. And God is sending for some of you all that are listening right now. I don't know if you're single, wave your hand if you're single. But God is saying, what I'm getting ready to do, I'm getting ready to make you first. God says, I'm getting ready to give you the things of the first. God says, the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. If you understand anything about marriage, God spoke to me. He says, marriage is like ministry. He says, you have the altar. The altar represents your intimacy with God, yourself and God. There has been a lost sense of intimacy in marriage. Intimacy is when you give the very most values and the pressures of your time, the pressures of who you are to the other person, and to show that person how you love them and how you desire to have them in your life. But there is a lack because we are in lust, we're not in love. There's a lot of people that will say I love you, but really they need to say I lust you. There's a lot of people that have gotten love and lust confused, and now we see lust on the TV, we see lust on the internet, we see and hear lust in the music that's going on now. There's no more love. So now what God is saying, we need to get back to having the altar. We need to get back to having the intimacy in marriage. Not only that, he also says the pulpit in the marriage. Well, what is the pulpit in the marriage? He says there is a messenger, the pastor, the shepherd, who preaches to the congregation. I want to ask you all a question. What have you been preaching this whole time? Your marriage is supposed to portray a certain image. You're supposed to be preaching a certain thing. And so what God is saying, there are many of you that's preaching false doctrine. You see it on the TVs. You see it on the movies. That's false doctrine, and they only show you what they think marriage is supposed to be like. But God says, I'm reconstructing marriage. God says, I'm tearing down strongholds, and God says, I'm building not just marriage but a union. God says, I want to have a bond between you all. God says, we have lost the bond. We have lost the intimacy. We have lost the unity. God says, united we stand, divided we fall. And God says, there's a lot of you all that's coming down because you're divided. There's a lot of you all that will not stand. You cannot stand. You won't stand because you have not stood for the one thing. God says, when the enemy comes in like a flood, I will lift up a standard. That's the second thing. We have lost standards. God says, you marrying anything and everything and everybody. God says, what are you preaching? God says, there should be a certain standard that you have in marriage. What is that standard? That standard should be able to come in against the wiles and the tricks of the enemy. God says, but we have allowed the enemy to bring cahoots into our marriages. We have allowed the enemy to bring cahoots into our schools. We have allowed the enemy to bring cahoots into our homes. But God says, we have lost the standard. But God says, all I need is one individual who's watching this today to bring up your standard. God says, all you got to do is raise the standard. God says, as you begin to raise the standard, God says, I'll begin to raise you up. God says, I'll exalt you and put you on the pedestal. God says, everybody be looking at your marriage, and people will come to total surrenderance of God and say, that's the marriage that God meant to have. And God said, we need to go back to Eden, where Adam and Eve first had the glory around them. They were naked, but they did not know they were naked because they were surrounded by the glory. Some of y'all have coached yourselves. Some of you are smelling yourselves. Some of you are seeing too much of you because you don't have the glory. You seeing too much of who need to pay the bills and who need to be the husband and who need to be the wife. But God says you won't have to marry about it. You won't have to worry about it because you are surrounded by the glory. Somebody ought to help me preach in this house. And so God says what I'm doing is I'm reconstructing the doctrine. God says I'm reconstructing what you've been preaching. God says you've been preaching false doctrine, but God says every wickedness in high places is coming down. God says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but principalities in high places. God says every marriage that's in high places, every wickedness that's in high places. God says it's coming down. But God says the first thing you have to understand is the congregation. Whatever has been preached, you will see the results in the congregation. God says the reason why we got knuckleheads out here who are going to jail and who are murderers now is because of your marriage. Your seed has become bad because your marriage wasn't right. God says your children can't be right. Your children won't act right in school. Your children getting pregnant out of wedlock because your marriage wasn't right. God says you have now planted the wrong seeds. Notice about Abraham. Notice about Abraham. Notice about Abraham. Notice about Abraham. But also notice about Adam. Notice about Eve. When they began to sin, Cain and Abel had an oath against each other, and Cain killed Abel. Cain became a murderer because of Adam. It was the mistake that Adam made in the marriage that made Cain a murderer. God says, will you make the mistake that will make your child become a murderer? God says now we have to get back to marriage. We have to get back to the basis, and the basis is we got to build on a foundation of Jesus Christ. God says if you put me first, God says seek my face. Seek my face, and in all your ways acknowledge me, and I will direct your path. God says I will bring my glory in your marriage. God says I will show up and show out in your marriage. God says you will make love so deeply and so profoundly that words can express. Pictures can't even paint a picture of what I'm getting ready to do for your marriage. God says I'm reconstructing the marriage. And so I want you all to be blessed today. I want you all to know that God is getting ready to reconstruct your marriage.